Well, we'll continue to watch what happens on the markets because, as we know, Trump and Canada's economy very much big issues for Canadians in the current election campaign. Abacus Data keeping a very close eye on how Canadians are feeling about those issues. And joining us right now is David Coletto, the founder and the CEO of Abacus Data. David, nice to see you.
Good to see you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Very happy to. Listen, so here we are, day 16 of this campaign. And when it comes to your numbers, the race doesn't seem to have changed very much since the last time we spoke. So let's begin there with the national numbers. How are things looking right now?
Well, they're looking exactly as we spoke last time. We've got a tie at the national level, 39 for the Liberals, 39 for the Conservatives, and the NDP at 11 with the Bloc at 6%. And this is almost exactly what we had last time, no change in those top three parties. And I think it's reflective of not a lot of change happening in the underlying numbers, but still putting the Liberals in a place where they're still the favorites right now. Despite a tie nationally, they're doing well enough in some regions that it would lead to them winning more seats and maybe even a majority, despite tied at the popular vote level.
Yeah, and as you've told us before, the Liberal vote being that much more efficient in terms of seat count. But if the top line is not changing that much, I found it interesting that you do note two shifts when it comes to the regions, one in Ontario, the other in Quebec. What's happening in those provinces that essentially could affect the campaign?
Well, what we're seeing in Ontario is the Liberal lead growing. It's now up to 6 points. A lot of that is happening in vote-rich GTA, which is really important, I think, for both parties, all parties, but particularly the Conservatives and Liberals. And that's a big factor. If the Liberals continue to grow that support, that's a ton of seats that they're going to hold and maybe even pick up a few. And then in Quebec, I think the Liberal majority is right now going through that province, that we see the Bloc coming down. We actually have the Bloc and the Conservatives tied for second with the Liberals ahead by 10. And so Quebec is really the place where I think the Liberals are looking and saying, we can win a big majority government if we can do something we didn't think was possible just a few months ago. And that's, run up the numbers in Quebec and pick up seats where the Bloc currently hold right now.
Okay, so slight shifts in Ontario and Quebec that you're watching out for and sharing with us, so thank you for that. But listen, you're also looking at some other factors that could influence the race here, and I want to begin here with voter enthusiasm. We have a graphic to show you on that. How does this help your understanding of what's happening in the race?
Well, we know that no one has to vote, and not everyone does. And so we try to keep measuring how enthusiastic are voters to actually turn out and vote. And one of the things first to note is that enthusiasm is generally higher in this election than we've seen over the last two, and that is reflective in a number of metrics we have. But for the first time in this campaign, Michael, we now have the Conservative supporters being more likely to say they're definitely going to be voting than Liberals, and that's giving them a slight advantage, right? We had seen for the last number of weeks, even leading into this campaign, that Liberal supporters were the most engaged. Liberal supporters were saying they were more likely to vote, which had been a complete flip over what we'd seen over the last few years. But I think one of the effects of this campaign might be that those Conservative voters are getting re-engaged. Maybe it's seeing some of the turnout at some of these events for Mr. Poilievre, maybe signaling a return of enthusiasm. It's no big advantage for the Conservatives, but it's enough that if you're a Conservative supporter and a Conservative campaign, you're feeling better about, because at least your voters now are perhaps re-engaging in this campaign in a way they weren't before.
Yeah, perhaps re-engaging, as you say, and a slight advantage. Although another board that's interesting is the preferred candidate for Prime Minister. Let's take a look at that. Tell us about your interpretation of the numbers here.
Well, if Mark Carney as Liberal leader and Pierre Poilievre were tied on vote intention, Mark Carney is still ahead. When we ask people, who would you prefer to be Prime Minister after this election, he's ahead by 5 points over Pierre Poilievre. That has not changed since our last survey, but it's still a reflection of the advantage that Mark Carney personally has in this race. He's the more popular leader. He's leading on some of the key attributes that I think are important to voters' choices, and so it's leading more people at least to say he would be their preferred choice at the end of this campaign to be Prime Minister, and that's still a strong place to be, and oftentimes is a leading indicator to how then somebody's going to vote. So something we're going to continue to watch.
Okay, and in terms of where the parties might look for additional votes, because as you say, static but some movement, if you dig into the numbers. But if a party's looking for additional votes, we do have this board tied to the preferred Prime Minister. What do these numbers tell you?
Well, they tell us, for example, that there are many New Democrats who right now say they would vote NDP, who are actually saying, well, I think Mark Carney might make the better prime minister. I prefer him over Pierre Poilievre. And so as this campaign goes on, and perceptions of both the competitiveness of the race, who's likely to win or lose, start to firm up in people's minds, this data gives us insight into where there's still growth, particularly for the Liberals. I still don't think they've peaked. I still think there's lots of voters out there open to voting Liberal who haven't yet converted to it. And Mark Carney is really the asset that might pull some of them. So this data really gives us insight into that push and pull around leadership that may not have converted voters yet, but still could as this campaign goes on.
Okay, and here we are, the third week of the campaign. What are you watching out for right now?
Well, I'm still watching. We don't know yet the full effect of last week's Liberation Day from the president in the U.S. And I think we still need to see how are Canadians reacting to it. Certainly, the drop in the markets and the upheaval of a whole bunch of things is creating more anxiety. Politically, who benefits from that, who gets harmed, I don't think we know yet, but that's what I'm going to be watching for this week.
Okay, David, I always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Thanks, Michael.